On the 11th of December, a Cessna 182 Skylane and a Grumman American Traveler were involved in a ground collision at Pearland Regional Airport in Houston, Texas. Fortunately, there were no injuries. Initial information indicates that the Cessna landed on the runway when it started taxiing off and was struck from behind by the Grumman. In this episode, I'm going to have a look at what happened, discuss how emergency training and aircraft systems knowledge is prudent and can help prevent a near tragedy like this from happening again. All that and more coming right up. So strap in and let's get into it.
December, good morning, 7614, 95 Mallow, 7 POB with altitude.
Coordinating, hail on a runner, bank, power, bank pressure rolling at 30 degrees. At 30 degrees there.
Sit by star 9000, 1013, KFR 25.
G'day everyone, and a very warm welcome to episode 154 of the Flight Training Australia podcast. All over Australia and all over the world, this is the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. G'day, my name's Trent Robinson, I'm your host, and welcome to everyone. Well, Merry Christmas. I hope you have a fantastic break. You've all enjoyed your Christmas party breakups and have a safe Christmas together with your family and friends and a wonderful and happy new year. The Spotify Unwrapped stats are out for another year. I had a bit of a look at what was going on there and just the overall podcast stats and all over all the platforms, and the podcast is listened to in over 107 countries and now over 270,000 downloads since I first started, with 16,700 just this last month alone, which is an amazing growth compared to what normally would be around 9,000 a month. So that's just huge. It's almost doubled recently, which is just, really caught me off guard and fantastic. So welcome to everybody if you're new to the podcast and listening. To those that have been around from the beginning or jumped on board somewhere in between, thank you again for all your support, your messages, your emails, your questions, and for sharing the podcast with your friends to spread the good word and make sure others benefit from it, as I know so many of you have. And of course, as always, thank you to my amazing Patreon members, for those who have come and gone and those that are still there or just joined, for your continued support and helping make this podcast possible. All right. So most of you would probably have seen the recent crash on YouTube and Facebook of the 182 and the Grumman Traveler. Quite mind-boggling scenes, and really makes you, wonder what on earth are they thinking? But as always, it's easy to judge and point the finger where we're sitting here at our computers, phones, or on our couch watching these things. And we need to, try and put ourselves in the situation with the pilot and how they've reacted, but think about, why did this happen? And ultimately, it's not about the blame game and the finger pointing. That's up to authorities and investigators and insurance companies to do all that. But whilst the investigation is still going on, of course, I'm never going to try and solve the puzzle. But there's always some takeaways we can take from this incident straight away as reminders and make us think about what's going on. And some of these areas have come up from time to time through flight test questioning with myself and flight reviews. And I know other examiners or instructors, of course, come across these things as well. So if you haven't seen the video or don't know what I'm talking about, the link is, of course, in the episode description. So if you want to pause this and go check it out, not if you're driving, but go have a watch. Otherwise, you can check it all out afterwards. So essentially, a Cessna 182 was going about their business, landing in Texas there, going onto the runway 32, I think it was. And unbeknownst to them, a Grumman was landing right behind them, just a couple hundred meters behind, if that. As the 182 slowed, started to vacate left off the runway onto the taxiway, the Grumman, like I said, was so close behind that it then collided into the left side of the Cessna, both coming to a very abrupt stop. The Cessna pilot, the left-hand side was completely mangled. They vacated the passenger door and then proceeded to assist the Grumman pilot and his two passengers. Few cuts and bruises, but otherwise everybody got away unscathed, thank goodness. So what on earth led to this situation? Well, here's a description from the passenger of the Grumman who filmed the accident. And this is their account as posted with the original video on YouTube. On December 11th, 2024, I was flying with a couple of friends from Galveston to Pearland, sorry if I get this wrong, guys, in America, Regional Airport. I was in the right-hand seat recording. Our plane, a 1973 Grumman, experienced electrical issues. First the headsets went out, then the radio, then the avionics, or navigation in brackets. We knew we had to get down quickly and made an emergency landing behind another plane with no working instruments. Fortunately, our skilled pilot was able to set us down. However, with no way to communicate, the pilot ahead was unaware of our presence and stopped fast to make a left turn on the tarmac. With our flaps not operational, we couldn't slow fast enough and ploughed into his plane as he turned. The prop tore a hole in the left side of the fuselage and destroyed the side of his aircraft. Thankfully, he had no passenger on the back seat or it would have been fatal. In our aircraft, the impact was devastating with aluminium crumpling and glass exploding everywhere. My shoulder pushed through the window and I sustained slight external injuries, but thankfully everyone was okay. The plane not so much, both likely totaled. All right, pretty full-on stuff. Now, that is coming from the passenger, who I'd say is a non-aviator, just given some of the language used. All right, so now, as you can appreciate, this was almost so much more. If there were passengers in that 182, as he said, potentially in the left-hand seat, could very well have taken the full brunt of the engine and propeller going through that aircraft. So lucky. And we now need to look at what led to the Grumman pilot taking such drastic action. One can only speculate for now. As I said, we'll wait for the formal interviews and the investigation to be finalised, but it does prompt some reminders for us all. Firstly, the simulation of emergency procedures, namely in this case, the electrical system. Now, I love electrical system failure simulations because from what can just start out as a simple you've got a low voltage light indication, can extend to all sorts of things over the flight if not dealt with properly, or if in reality it is indeed a full electrical failure. If we can't reset the alternator and restore power, we'll need to load shed, prepare for possible flapless or a manual gear extension as appropriate. The radios might be out, so we need to do a no radio entry, examines no radio entry procedures, and that was the case here as well. But I'm going to come back to the radio in a minute. Now, can we reset the alternator? Is there a circuit breaker? If you look around most aircraft, you'll probably find you won't find one. It is, of course, the master switch in most cases. Most aircraft will tell you not to reset the alternator in flight unless it's a real situation. However, this will usually, in most cases, fix the problem. Typical issues of alternators can be worn brushes, loose terminals, or it can, in fact, just be dead. I've been flying a 182 with a alternator cable that just completely shredded itself. All right. So let's say now we're some distance from our destination. Can we just turn the master switch off and save all the power? Won't that kill the engine? What gives our engine the spark? Is it the alternator like a car? Absolutely not. Unlike a car, if the alternator dies, we go to battery power. If the battery dies, so does our car. This is obviously not appropriate for an aircraft. So we, of course, have a different system in place. The alternator charges the battery and provides electrical power for all our operating systems, but the magnetos are there to provide the spark energy for our engine. So yes, we can turn the master switch off and conserve whatever battery power we have left. Did the Grumman pilot in this accident understand this? Or was this part of his emergency to land the aircraft so hastily? Have they ever gone through a full electrical failure scenario in recent training before? Are you familiar with your electrical system in your aircraft? What will be affected and what systems you may or may have compromised? Now, in the video description, the passenger mentioned that they had no working instruments. Now, as I said, I'd say by the language used, they're probably not a regular flyer. But a simple glance at the panel shows, of course, that was not the case. Yes, the radios and the GPS were gone, but the rest of it all looked to be working just fine. The airspeed, altimeter, and vertical speed indicator, of course, are all part of the pitot-static system, and the attitude indicator, the DG, the vacuum with the turn coordinator as electric backup. Everything a pilot needs to fly an aircraft to the ground. But what about the radio? I think this was a big part of the accident because radios in most parts of the world are all about telling everyone where they are and what they're doing, communicating with other aircraft, and of course receiving instructions, being told what to do. To be suddenly cut off orally from, all the aircraft in the circuit area can be alarming to some pilots. When was the last time they did a no radio entry, read the procedures, even practiced one? Have they even had one done before? Of course, the airplane doesn't know it doesn't have any radios. It will fly just happily around the circuit, giving the pilot time to work things out and coming up with a plan as long as there's fuel in the tanks. It certainly didn't need the pilot to make such a hasty landing right there up the backside of another aircraft and be so close. Right, and of course, to make matters worse, the airplane in front didn't know that they were there, and the Grumman would have been making a flapless approach at a higher speed, and in the video seemed to be closing the gap on the Cessna in front. Do we need radios to fly an airplane? Of course not. Half the time you hear me on this podcast complaining about people not making radio calls enough. But for some, if they're used to a situation, and we get it from pilots coming up from Metro D airports down south, coming up to airstrips up here, where if there's no one around, we'll make a downwind call and that's it. That is very foreign to those pilots. All right. So this isn't even an international thing. This is something that can affect everybody, of talking too much on the radio sometimes or not enough. Now, even after all this had happened, if we talk about errors and committed errors in threat and error management, there was still time to bug out and, of course, do a go-around. But this didn't happen. Even with that aeroplane right in front of them, the gap closing, the pilot would have known there was no way they were going to be able to stop in time, yet they just were frozen in time and felt committed to the landing. Did the pilot think he only had a little bit of battery power left and the engine might quit? Were they worried about other traffic in the pattern not knowing that they were there? It was an uncontrolled aerodrome with a ground sort of CAGRO reporter there, but it was an uncontrolled aerodrome. So were they worried about that? How would you feel and react in this situation without radios? What else would you do? I've had some people tell me, well, they could have used the headset and the phone, but who are they going to call? Certainly wouldn't have had the phone number of the pilot in front of them. So I don't think that would have been a big help in this case. But once the aircraft landed, they were essentially all at that point just passengers along for the crash. You'll note the pilot desperately tried to steer the aircraft like a car, using the yoke with two hands to turn right and try and avoid the crash. A typical stress response, as seen in many other incidents and accidents and videos of a similar nature on YouTube. You'll probably know the one of the bloke who landed the aircraft, went full power, turned right and steered the aeroplane straight into a hangar, was using the yoke like a steering wheel with, of course, no response. You can hear the pilot at the end of the video sounding quite stressed and immediately taking responsibility for the accident. It must have been a horrible experience, but one that was completely avoidable. And of course, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but we always must be respectful of those involved, and the actions that they took were the best that they could do at the time. What we can do is take on board the lessons to be learned from incidents and accidents like these and do our best to stay prepared for whatever challenges may face us. So next time you're on a flight review, next training flight, when your instructor simulates a failure, or if they're not, ask them to put you through one. When we're doing line training, it's not just about going from A to B to C back to A again. I will simulate a failure, run through phase 1 and 2 checks, pick up any errors. We can't remember all these things just from our initial endorsement training. We need to revisit them. We need to review them. That's what proficiency checks, flight reviews, flight tests are all about. All right, guys, that is it for this episode. I hope you have a truly wonderful Christmas. You get lots of cool aviation stuff. And like I said, wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I will see you in 2025. I'm just going to take a couple of weeks off. I'm going to get one episode out before I then go on 2 weeks leave. And I'll be heading down to Adelaide. Going to jump in a cage, hopefully see some white pointers in Port Lincoln, and go see the guys down Adelaide biplanes and do my float plane in the Super Cub. Really looking forward to that. And then over to Perth for this third week of January. I'll be over there on the 10th of January and hanging around Jandakot doing some flying and work and stuff as well. So hope to see you all at maybe one of those locations. But in the meantime, blue skies, stay safe, and remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.